Hi girls, today we're going to be talking about our second way to measure matter. So last week we talked about mass and weight. Those are two ways to measure matter. And today we're going to be talking about volume. So just as a reminder, volume is how much space matter takes up. There are three kind of ways of measuring volume. One is if you're measuring a liquid, you probably want to measure in liters or milliliters. 1 milliliter is also the same thing as a cubic centimeter. So we measure regular solids and irregular solids using cubic centimeters. When you're finding the volume of a liquid, a good instrument to use is this thing right here. It's called a graduated cylinder. And when you are measuring the liquid, it's always best to read the amount using the bottom of this little dip right here. This is called the meniscus. And we always use the number that's at the very bottom of that meniscus. So when you're finding the volume of a rectangular solid, or a regular solid, it's pretty easy. A regular solid is any solid that can be where the volume can be found by using a formula. So for example, this box, any rectangular solid has a formula that you can find the volume using the length and the width and the height. In this case, it's length times width times height, and it's relatively easy. Finding the volume of an irregular solid is somewhat more difficult, but it can be done. One of the common ways that it's done is by water displacement. So you can put some water in a graduated cylinder and measure the volume that you have at first, and then you can drop something in that's, irregularly shaped and doesn't have a formula to solve for its volume. And you can see how much the water rises. And the difference between where the water was and where the water is now will be the volume of whatever it is you put in. Another thing I want to talk to you guys about today is density. As we talked about before, density is how tightly packed matter is, how tightly packed all the atoms are to each other. And if you look at these two pictures, this is kind of a good visual. This is how I think of density. This is a city, and it's very densely populated. That means it has tons and tons and tons of people that live in a very small area. If you go out to the country, you will see that it's not very densely populated. People in the country have large, wide spaces between each other, and so there's less population density. The same thing is true when we're talking about matter. When something is very dense, that means the particles inside of it are packed together very tightly, and there's not very much space in between the atoms. Things that have not so high density, the particles are more loosely packed and there is more space in between them. Density is measured in units of grams per cubic centimeter, and here is the formula for density right here. Density is the amount of mass something has per the amount of volume it takes up. So I want you to think for a minute and tell me, if something has a huge mass and it takes up hardly any space, does it have a lot of density or a little bit of density? Hopefully what you're concluding is that if something has a lot of mass and not very much volume, it's very, very dense. So on the other hand, if you have something that has just a little bit of mass and a huge amount of volume, that thing will be not very dense. That's all we're going to talk about for today.